The most famous of all Greek stories was told by the famous poet Homer. He told two stories, the Iliad, which told the story about the Trojan Wars, and the Odyssey, which tell the story about Odysseus' journey home. So the short version of the Iliad goes like this. By the way, if you want to watch a movie about it, then the movie, Troy, tells us quite well. But until you get that chance, here is a condensed version. It all started with the marriage of Peleus and Thetis. They had a son called Achilles. Unfortunately, Eris, the goddess of discord, doesn't get invited to the wedding. Probably because she's a troublemaker. Go figure. Anyway, Eris decides that she wants attention, so she promises to throw a golden apple to the fairest of the women there. 3 of the goddesses want the apple. Hera, the wife of Zeus, Athene, the goddess of wisdom and war, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love. For some reason we do not know, Zeus decides that the best way to decide was to give Paris of Troy, a Trojan prince, the honor of deciding who is the fairest. So Paris, the prince of Troy, decides that Aphrodite is the fairest and chooses her. As a result, Aphrodite helps Paris take Helen, the wife of King Menelaus of Sparta, back to Troy. Paris is successful as he has the protection of Aphrodite. But the Spartans persuade the rest of the Greeks that they must invade Troy and return Helen to her husband. So Agamemnon, the Messenian king, is chosen to lead the Greeks in the invasion. Agamemnon is obsessed with bringing Paris to justice and gives his daughter in sacrifice to the gods in hope of their support. Unfortunately, the gods don't all think that sacrificing your own daughter is a very good tribute to them, so only Hera, Athena and Poseidon support the Greeks, whilst Apollo, Ares and Aphrodite support the Trojans. As a result of their intervention, this war takes 10 years to fight. That's a very long time. Remember Achilles? He goes to fight for the Greeks, but he gets angry at Agamemnon because Agamemnon has taken a woman that Achilles acquired as a prize. He refuses to fight for the Greeks and complains to his mom about the unfair treatment meted out by Agamemnon. Thetis, Achilles' mom, persuades Zeus, the king of the gods, to favor the Trojans in the war. So the Greeks start to lose the war. Even though the Greeks were losing, Achilles continued to sulk and refused to fight. So his cousin, Patroclus, borrows Achilles' armor and gets killed by Hector, the Trojan hero. Achilles gets even madder and goes on a rampage, killing Hector but then getting shot by an arrow in his heel, which ultimately kills him. Thus we get the name of the Achilles heel. Eventually, the Greeks decide to get inside Troy by leaving them a wooden horse as a gift. Inside the horse were Greek warriors led by Odysseus who, once inside the town, kill everyone and burn it to the ground. Thus the Trojans were defeated and the Greeks were victorious. As for Paris and Helen, they escaped. There are many myths and stories about where they ended up going to. To find out what happens next, you will have to read Homer's Odyssey, or alternatively, pay very close attention to the next piece of video. Once again, it has been a pleasure to talk to you, and I look forward to discussing more cool things about the ancient Greeks next time. Until then, goodbye.
Sing to me, O Muse, of the man of twists and turns, driven time and again off course once he had plundered the hallowed heights of Troy. Muse? Hey, Muse, I could use a little help here. Gee, thanks. Dear Tim and Moby, who was Homer? From Zen. According to legend, Homer was a Greek poet who lived around 800 BCE. He is credited with writing the Iliad and the Odyssey, two epic poems. An epic poem is a long poem that tells a story of a heroic achievement. In ancient Greece, that meant warfare, feuds between royal houses, and lots of interference by the gods and goddesses. Well, there's no record that a guy named Homer really existed. Back then, poetry was an oral tradition, not a written one. Poems were passed from generation to generation, and they'd change a little based on who was telling them. So, really, no one knows who wrote Homer's poems. They may indeed have been written by one person, or they could have been assembled gradually over the years through thousands of tellings. But whether or not he was a real guy, the ancient Greeks regarded Homer as the greatest poet of all time. Traditionally, he's represented as an old blind man with a gray beard. Well, the Iliad tells the story of the Trojan War. It begins with hundreds of Greek ships sailing across the Aegean Sea to fight against Troy, an ancient city-state in modern-day Turkey. The Greeks are angry because the Trojans have kidnapped Helen, the beautiful wife of the king of Sparta. She was stolen away by Paris, a Trojan prince. Homer introduces us to the characters on each side. Achilles, the Greeks' greatest warrior. Hector, the hot-headed Trojan prince and commander. Agamemnon, the emotional, stubborn leader of the Greek forces. And Priam, the wise old king of Troy. These guys don't just fight with their enemies, they bicker a lot with each other, too. They win glory on the battlefield, and also wrestle with concepts like friendship, loyalty, and mourning. Well, that one's pretty violent. The Odyssey tells the story of Odysseus, a Greek fighter in the Trojan War. After fighting in Troy for 10 years, it takes him another 10 to get back to his home island of Ithaca. Why'd it take so long? Well, Odysseus angered Poseidon, the god of the sea, so Poseidon wouldn't let him go home. Instead, Odysseus and his men embark on a series of wild adventures. They get captured by a one-eyed giant cyclops, get turned into pigs by a witch called Circe, avoid the sirens whose beautiful song leads men to their deaths, and deal with shipwrecks, sea monsters, and other problems. Meanwhile, back in Ithaca, everyone thinks he's dead, except for his son Telemachus and his wife Penelope. Telemachus tries to protect Penelope from all these other men who want to marry her and take over Odysseus' home. Someone eventually wrote down the stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey. The version of the Odyssey that we know today has been around since the 7th or 8th century BCE. And it's been studied, referenced, and discussed pretty much ever since then. It's inspired works by artists, poets, authors, and playwrights for thousands of years. More recently, Homer's works have served as the basis of films, cartoons, and even video games. The poetry can be tough to understand, but you get used to it. Now, where was I? Right. Many cities of men he saw and learned their minds, many pains he suffered, heartsick on the open sea, fighting to save his life. Oh, come on!